all the way from Seattle on our screens tonight. Rather than having to travel, here she is with her presentation about the book. I think my impression of her already is that even if you have not read the book, her storytelling will be so good that you will probably wish to read it following her presentation. So I don't want to make much more of a do about things. I just think we should get going. Lynda, you might take over and go right ahead. And welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us.
Great. Well, thank you, Abigail, for that warm welcome. And it's really a pleasure to be with you, if you will, in this sort of weird virtual way that we're now all together. And as Abigail said, there are some good things about this. I didn't have to sit on a plane all day and spew a lot of CO2 that makes global warming even worse. So, we'll count our blessings here. And I wish everyone well on this call as we begin this new year. I hope that if you haven't had your vaccine, you'll get it soon. We're all in the same situation here. And, I take a lot of comfort, as I'm sure you all do, from the natural world and its cycles of disturbance and its cycles of loss and renewal. And, let us look to nature for strength and for beauty and for solace and also for hope, because after all, this example and this vast intelligence that we're so lucky to live in and among as we go about our days and our lives on this beautiful earth, there's a lot there to be lifted up by. So I just wanted to start with that thought, since our country is going through a hard time, to acknowledge all those who are having a hard time. My heart is with you, and my hope is with you and with our country. So let's talk a little bit about our topic of Witness Tree. This is a book that I had an enormous amount of fun writing a couple of years ago. I had a great bit of luck. You're talking to a newspaper reporter. I'm a daily newspaper reporter. We still exist. We're still out there at these local papers all over the country. And the paper I work for is a very special paper, in my opinion, because it's locally owned and it's locally published by the same family for 130 years, which is very unusual anymore. It's called the Seattle Times. I am their environment reporter, which out here in the Pacific Northwest is an incredible joy, because we write about everything on the environmental team, from climate to salmon to orca whales to you name it. We still got large, big carnivores out here. We've got wolves. We've got it all, really. I mean, it's also a very diverse state with desert ecology and rainforest ecology, and we have a very important farming region. So as an environmental reporter, there's just a lot to dig into. And one of the things that's always been very near and dear to my heart is trees. I grew up not far from where you all sit, in a place called Westchester County, New York. It's the same ecological continuum of New England. Of the species were white pine and oak, and of course the incredible maples. And I grew up in a place with 7 acres of trees and a pond and a ramshackle old farmhouse built in 1762. And my mother would say to me, "Go outside and find something to do," every day. And so I never really changed from this skinny kid with a black eye and calamine lotion all over me that I see in all the pictures of myself as a kid. Outside is where I've always wanted to be. So of course I grew into an environment reporter, and one who has a special fascination for trees. So, back in 2013, I had the incredible good fortune to be a science fellow at MIT with the Knight Science Journalism program. And I was selected one of 12 fellows from around the world to go and be at MIT for a whole academic year. And I used that time to dig into this question of climate change. I wanted to tell the climate change story differently. I could just tell people were tuning it out, that it had turned into a story of parts per billion and politics and all that the whole story of how our planet was actually changing before our eyes, right here, right now, in our own backyards, was getting lost. And I thought, what if you could find an animal, a plant, some species, some beloved living thing, and tell the story through it of how its life was already changing, its patterns of how it sustains itself. It could be it could be something about the changing seasons because of climate warming that would bring this story to people's hearts and minds and neighborhoods in a much more immediate way. And I thought, while I was at MIT, that was the thing I wanted to pursue. This subject has a name. It's called phenology. It sounds like that FACO weird science phrenology of heads, but it's not. It's phenology, and it's the study of the seasons, these regularly occurring seasonal changes in nature, bird migrations, trees leafing out, changing color. And this is something that people have paid attention to across our planet forever. I mean, either because they needed to know it for agriculture or for religious observance or whatever their reason, people have always paid deep attention to the seasons. We're deeply chronological beings. And this means that we have very ancient records of seasonal change. The monks in Kyoto, Japan have records going back to the 8th century of when the cherry trees blossomed because it was important to their religious observance. The Marsham family in the UK, Britain, had a record running through their family on their estate that went back hundreds of years of, when the first cuckoo called, when the very first blossoms came on the foxgloves, this beautifully detailed seasonal record of change on their family place. In the United States, of course, Thomas Jefferson was a great phenologist. In fact, it drove him crazy when he was in the Capitol. He would write to his family back in Virginia, tell me, are the first leaves yet on the oak? Are they the size of a squirrel's ear? He would pester his family to send him news of what was happening seasonally back on the farm. It drove him wild to be separated from that intimate daily knowledge of the progression of the seasons. And growing up, as I did, I too, from very early age, was very just seasonally attuned. When was the day I'd get off the school bus and I'd go up in the woods, as I did every day after school, and hear for the first time the spring frogs. You call them peepers where you live. Out here, we have a different spring frog, but it is just as loud. And that first time that you hear that little voice trilling, it's a thrill, isn't it? New life is at hand. A new year is truly beginning. And so as I thought about this climate change story and how to tell it differently at MIT, I was allowed to also take classes at Harvard, and I found a scientist at Harvard who was all about phenology. He was fascinated with the tree canopy and how the changing of the schedule of the seasonal changes in the tree canopy was influenced by climate change. When were the leaves coming out? When was the tree in full leaf, that beautiful, glorious full leaf of summer? When did the leaves first start to change in color, and when did they drop? These were the phases that he was tracking. And, think about this for a moment. You're in a deciduous wood. When that forest first switches on and when it goes to sleep for the winter, this is going to be like the single most profound signal to the entire ecology of that place of when everything happens, the pollinators, the birds, the amphibians, the mammals, everything is going to be cued to the productivity of that forest and its schedule. So if you can get under the hood of that forest and know when that engine turns on and when it's, full throttle, when it's starting to senesce and, throttle down, when it's switched off, it's going to tell you everything about the forest and what's going on. So Andrew Richardson and his lab wound up being the place that I glommed onto during that fellowship year. And in that time, I met a fantastic person named John O'Keefe, who was the field biologist for Andrew's studies about phenology at the Harvard forest. So the story I'm going to tell you is about what we came to call the witness tree, this tree at the Harvard forest that John was using and I came to use as a primary point of focus to understand the changes in the tree canopy, the changes in the forest, and how they were being driven by climate change. So let me start out by just taking you on a little trip. We're going to go to the Harvard forest. And by the way, you need to go to the Harvard forest. It's open 365, including during COVID. for walks. And it's a 7,000 acre, 4,000 acre natural wood that has been owned by Harvard University for a very long time, and it's very heavily wired with all kinds of odd experimental stations, and so you'll see things there that you wouldn't see anywhere else, or you might hear a drone go overhead, what have you. But it's open to people to take a walk, and it's just a beautiful wood. And once things are back open again, a nature club or a group like yours is very welcome to go there and even stay on a retreat and have meetings and so forth. It's a very special resource, and it's part of Harvard University. And this is Shaler Hall, which is the main administrative building. And you'll notice the classic Harvard look, right? The red brick and all that stuff. And there was this kind of running joke among the scientists out at the Harvard Forest that it was just Harvard enough, right? I mean, it had the name and it had a look and it had that going for it, but there was a lot of independence in being way the heck out in Petersham. So they're an hour and a half from Cambridge. And they liked it that way. Kind of the sweet spot, a little bit of the best of all worlds. This beautiful wood, right? It's a classic New England wood. These are the sugar maples that line the driveway where you first come onto the property. And you see the old granite fence posts there to the left of the trees. It just magnificent. It in the fall, this is what you get, right? I mean, that day right there, that's about October 10th. So keep it in mind, that the second week of October, that's when you want to go. That's classically full color, height of the color at the Harvard Forest. And, getting to live there as a journalist, I was what's called a Bullard Fellow in forest research at the Harvard Forest. This is after the MIT fellowship. I heard about this opportunity to go and live at the forest and study this tree. And I thought, God, I want to do that. Sure, I want to do that. So I took a second year off from the paper. Incredibly, they allowed me to do that. They even paid my health benefits, bless them. And they let me go live at the Harvard Forest with this tree. And I'll show you where I lived. It was incredibly beautiful. That farmhouse right there with the beautiful bay window on it, that's where I lived. It's an apartment in an old grand dam of a farmhouse that had been remade many times on the Harvard Forest property. Those are the cows that I fed every weekend when the staff went home. I fed cows. And, it was just beautiful. You see the picnic table there in the front yard. That's where I wrote a lot of my journal for the book that became Witness Tree. It was a chance for deep immersion in one place with one tree to learn the whole science of seasonal change, how that actually happens inside a tree, and how that was being pushed by climate change. Just kind of a fun fact, since you're New Englanders and you believe in the glory of wood, the natural wood pile. Okay, you want to talk about a wood pile, take a look at this. This is how we heated at the Harvard Forest. They ripped out the oil burner and they heat the whole place with a wood furnace that is the source of the heat to boil the water that goes through the radiators on the whole campus. It's fantastic. Look at the wood. And you know a lot about a person by the quality of their wood pile. How dry is it? How well stacked? You can't fake that. It's either dry or it isn't. The pile either stays up all season or it doesn't. And these people, I knew when I saw this wood pile when I first showed up in August, it's going to be good. So it was also a very international place. This was a great surprise. Here I am in this little dinky town, small town, remote town, Petersham, off in the woods. And I never expected that it would be such an international community, but science is like that. You had PhDs from around the world, visiting scholars from around the world, and we were all out there, just like marooned out in the woods together. And so we became friends. We cooked dinner together. This is Isra. She was my friend, married to Sadiq, her husband, who was getting his PhD. And so I taught her how to make an apple pie. And, we just had a lot of fun. It was an eye-opener to me to realize that science is a very social, collegial activity. We think of it as super competitive. People are trying to race each other to the conclusion and they're in competition for money. That's true. That's part of it. But this is the much bigger reality. People from all over the world getting together in my backyard on a summer evening for pesto and a bottle of wine and just share stories and talk and conversation. That's what was so much fun. I mean, as I look around this table, I see my friends from everywhere, from the Sudan to Pakistan to New Hampshire. You know, we were from everywhere. And it was also a place where people really helped one another. What's going on in this picture is my friend is getting ready to graduate from UMass at Amherst, and one of the senior scientists at the Harvard Forest is tucking him into his ceremonial robes. And you know, Aaron Ellison is an ecologist, and he took on my friend coming all the way from Sudan to work on his PhD and his thesis. And he didn't have to do that, but he did it because he wanted to. He wanted to invest in the career of a scientist all the way on the other side of the world who would take that back to his community and his university. And I saw that over and over again. And so it, you know, this experience I had at the Harvard Forest, it was not only a scientific experience, it was a humanistic experience. I discovered a whole side to science and scientists that I had not known. I'm sure they learned things about journalists and reporters that they didn't know. So that was quite wonderful. It's Thanksgiving dinner, you know, because we're all marooned out there, we cooked a big feast. It was a lot of fun. People brought family recipes from home, and we had a big, beautiful dinner together. Again, just this beautiful conviviality. We were a community not only of learners, but of friends. But of course, you know, really true fact, it was mostly about science, right? I mean, here I am, I have this incredible opportunity to be living among some of the world's best forest ecologists. And they taught me everything from how you core a tree to learn the story of its life, to how to understand the inner workings of the botany of a tree. You know, they're not just standing there. We're going to talk more about that. And then, you know, ultimately to respect that it isn't just about trees, it's about forests. You know, the trees together create a forest ecology that is unique. This is different from a plantation, by which I mean a forest that's been planted for logging dimensional lumber and so forth. These are managed industrial plantations, which is just another kind of farming at an industrial scale. These are true natural forests, and they include the whole suite of life, from the microorganisms in the soil to the mycorrhizal communication in the root system, which is truly fascinating to me to realize that trees are actually communicating with one another. Who knew? To the very intricate plumbing inside every tree that moves the water up and the nutrients throughout the tree that it manufactures itself from sunlight, water, and oxygen. You look at a tree, where did it come from? It's literally made from thin air through a process called photosynthesis that we've never been able to replicate in any lab anywhere. It's unique. You know, and learning all this was just a thrill. This is my friend Neil Peterson. He's at the Harvard Forest. He's an ecologist who specializes in dendrochronology. This is coring trees to look at the structure of the wood ring by ring and see the history, the environmental history that every tree holds. They are our first historians, our first diarists. They can tell us by the size of the growth ring, you know, was it a wet year? Was it a dry year? Was there a fire scar? Is there a year where you see a big retraction in growth, and then you can check that against other human sources, newspaper articles, farmers' journals, whatever, and find out, well, what happened that year? Oh, it was a huge gypsy moth year, no wonder. And Neil was a master of coring, and I went out on several coring expeditions with him. He's here now with David Orwig, also pictured. David Orwig is a master at the Harvard Forest of old growth. He knows the story of big trees and how big trees are ecologically different. They fill a specific important niche. He's also the man at the Harvard Forest who's made a study of woolly adelgid and the march of woolly adelgid through the hemlock forests of New England, tragically killing off that species. You know, this is a climate change effect that has been underway for some time, as these insects are no longer killed off because the winters aren't cold enough or long enough or deep enough. So that bug is propagating, spreading state by state, year by year, deeper and deeper into New England. And, you know, these hemlocks are just not resistant to this sucking insect. It's really like an aphid. It takes all the nutrition out of the tree, and it takes 5-7 years, but it'll kill. Even a large mature hemlock will be dead in 7 years. They die from the top down. It's a very sad sight. Can't really do anything about it at scale. You can't really spray a whole forest. And David Orwig there in the black shirt, he's one of the world experts on that insect. I went out on several field trips with these scientists and did just the grunt work, helping out with marking plots and learning how, I was the recorder of data on some of these trips. And it was just a way for me to learn the process of science, which really is about a very careful gathering and repetition of data over time to test a hypothesis about why something may be happening. And to actually be out in the field in these beautiful woods was part of the thrill. But the other thrill was just watching how they work, how the scientific method really works, and how people worked collaboratively across different methods and teams to solve complex questions. In this particular instance, what you see going on here is we're measuring the trees that have grown up in a plot that was blown down by the hurricane of 1938. And this is in one of the few places, this is the Pisgah forest, the Pisgah tract in a forest in New Hampshire, where they didn't salvage log after the 1938 hurricane. They let everything just lie to study the process of recovery after a huge disturbance like that. How does a forest come back? So all these years later, scientists keep going back and measuring the trees that have grown up since. That's what's going on in this photo, and literally recording stem by stem every tree on that plot. How big is it? What species is it? How's the process of regeneration taking place? Which species are surging ahead and overtaking the others? What's the condition of the trees still on the ground? Everything matters on that plot. Everything, every piece of dead or downed wood, they care about it, they measure it, they log it. And this is how you solve really big questions in science over the long term. There's always this effort to extend the boundary of inquiry into another year, bring in more people. These long-term collaborative ecological experiments and research projects are how we can solve some of the bigger questions in the natural world. And the Harvard Forest is what's called a long-term ecological research site, funded generously by the National Science Foundation. And there are many of these around the country. There's one down here up where I live in the Northwest in Oregon called the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest. So these are not ad hoc one-offs. They're part of a whole system, a connected system of learning centers, science centers that specialize in long-term research. So this tower, we're going to talk a lot more about this. This tower is something Andrew came up with. His idea for understanding the tree canopy was to get pictures of it instantaneously and continuously with digital cameras. These are the same things they put in a bank to catch a robber. Well, in this case, these bank security cameras that you see affixed to the top of this 120-foot high tower are not looking for criminals. They're watching the canopy, and they're continuously uploading images of the canopy and storing them in a data bank at the University of New Hampshire. Why would you want to do that? Well, you might want to do that if you want to watch the progression of the tree canopy, like while you're in your office in Cambridge, or for that matter, anywhere around the world. You're creating a data bank that is continuously in real time recorded of the seasonal progression of a forest. And you would want to do that so that you can do it again next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, and so on, so that you can see change over time in this seasonal calendar. And so what Andrew hit on was genius. It was a whole new way to gather data in the forest, not just tree by tree and on foot, which really limits how much you can see, not just in a satellite, which only goes overhead every 6 months. And if it's a cloudy day, you don't get a very big picture. And it's also quite high up, so the resolution is not that great. This is different. This is right at the canopy level. It's instantaneous, real time, every day in daylight hours. It's basically a virtual digital observatory, and nothing like it had ever existed before. And the National Science Foundation, when they heard about this, got super excited, and they gave him a whole bunch of money to put up a whole bunch of these towers not only at the Harvard Forest, but elsewhere in the country, to create our first digital seasonal observatory trained on tree canopies and different ecological systems. It was a whole new idea, a straight up discovery, and really very exciting because of the power of simple observation. What is the forest doing now? And more importantly, at scale. So you could really see over a big landscape what's happening and over time. Those are the three key ingredients: actual observation, not just a guess. Number two, at scale, lots and lots of area, and over time. That gives you a picture such as we've never had before. But what's missing? The understory, right? You also have to know what's going on in the understory. And this is why Andrew combined these observations digitally taken by these cameras with a boot survey, old-fashioned, old school, walk in the woods on this phenology trail that John O'Keefe had started, believe it or not, 25 years earlier. He was just looking for a way to get in the woods at least once a week when he worked at the Harvard Forest. He just wanted to get outside. And he had this idea of setting up a phenology trail and keeping simple data of 50 trees. And he kept it for 25 years before Andrew ever showed up. Probably wasn't even born yet. What this meant is that Andrew comes along, you know, Mr. Hotshot scientist out of Harvard, and he meets John, who's got this fantastic database that he's been meticulously keeping, literally with a pencil and a clipboard, of these trees at the Harvard Forest. Wow. So they form a partnership where Andrew is feeding in this data at the forest level, and John is basically providing the ground truth with his own observation, human eye, hand, foot on the ground, of what's going on in the understory, what am I hearing in the woods, and what am I seeing in these same 50 trees that can be the ground truth for this larger digital look at things. And so put the two together, it's a very powerful way to look at a forest. And for me, imagine the fun of meeting these two people and beginning to discover their two approaches to understanding this beautiful woods. And through all 4 seasons, this was the other beauty of it. You know, this opportunity to be in one place throughout a whole year was so very special. You know, you're not just going out there and visiting for a little bit and then leaving. No, I got to watch the forest go through its entire cycle of seasonal change. And as it happened, pure luck, the winter I was there was that winter of 2013-14. Remember, this was the killer blizzard winter when the polar vortex went crazy and we had this super cold weather and we had tons of snow and the National Guard was called out to shovel out the subway in Boston. That's the winter I was out at the Harvard Forest. And we had so much snow, it never stopped. It was great. I loved it. This is my house looking out that same beautiful sun porch that I showed you when we first started out. Yeah, that's the sun porch in January. It was so cold. Oh my God, I loved it. It was great. Here are the cows. My cows, I kept them going too. You know, I kept pitching the hay out on the weekends, and then I devised a treat that they really liked. This is a little bit creepy. These are cows, right? So what happens to cows? What do they turn into? We all know they turn into hamburger, right? So what was their favorite treat? They loved hamburger buns. I didn't know how to feel about that, but it's super true. I would show up at the fence with hamburger buns for them for a little snack, and they would come running no matter what. Boom, they couldn't wait. They liked it even better with a little molasses put on it. Divine. Here was the other thing about the Harvard Forest. They had incredible records. They had a beautiful library, as only Harvard would have, you know, with the perfect drawers that slide just right and beautifully kept data, including really special things like this. This was the journal kept by the owners of the original farm that was the land before Harvard came along and bought it. And this is John Sanderson's handwriting. And he's keeping track of, you know, all the purchases on the farm and the planting and all the rest of it. And it's fascinating to look at it because his handwriting changes over the course of his life, from this beautiful, perfect copperplate writing early in his life to this terribly crabbed, can barely do it late in life. And it's a beautiful journal of the farm. And the archives at the forest were full of this kind of solid gold for landscape history. It was so much fun to mine. So, you know, the Harvard Forest had it all. It had the trees, it had the scientists, and it had this spectacular data. So for a reporter, an author looking for a story, I had everything I needed. I had the place, I had the characters, and I had the information all in one spot. It was heaven. Here's John, my friend. You know, look at that face. What a friendly, outgoing, lovely, charming man. I asked him if I could start accompanying him on his phenology walks, which he did twice a week in the spring and in the fall. And here's what he said: sure. You know, it's great. And you see me, the paranoid Northwesterner dressed for the New England woods. Have you noticed that everything in your woods wants to suck your blood? Everything? Mosquitoes, and then it's black flies, and then it's the ticks. There are even leeches in the ponds. Oh my God. I mean, I'm from the East Coast, but I grew up before all that started happening. We didn't have ticks then. We didn't have that. So I learned to put on this incredible outfit that it's field clothing that's it's got this stuff called pyrethium in it. It's a natural anti-pest something or another. God knows, I'll probably die from it. But I put that on with this hat when I would go out in the woods to try to keep off the ticks. I never got sick. I never got Lyme disease. I never, ever had a problem. So it is possible to be in the woods all day, every day, crawl around, climb trees, everything, and never have a problem. You just have to check yourself for ticks religiously every night, never skip it, and you will be fine. So don't let anyone tell you they can't go in the woods. It's not true. You just have to pay attention. Here's John in his office, and I want you to notice what's on his desk. So those are his data sheets. When I told you that he'd been keeping a record of these same 25 trees for 50 years, that's what these long columns are, is the trees are on the far left, and then his various notes on those trees. Are they coming, are the bud scales separating yet? Are the buds open yet? Have they burst? How big are the leaves? He would track each progression of the season ever so carefully as it unfolded. And to me, the best part, my favorite part, were all the marginalia that he also wrote in. First day he would hear the wood frogs, lots more ticks this year. Whatever his observations were about that particular year in the forest added so much to your sense of not only what the trees were doing, but what the whole forest ecosystem was doing. It's just a beautiful record, such as Aldo Leopold kept on his place in Sand County, you know. And this practice of phenology and observation of a place over time is something we all can do and should do. I mean, it is a way not only of understanding the forest, but honestly, it's a stance in life. It's a beautiful way to be wonderfully alive to the seasonal changes around you and the beauty of the natural world. And I had so much fun reading these data sheets. I would go over there at night after dinner and go down to his desk and just leaf through his files and see what he'd been learning over the years. And it was just a beautiful lens onto the forest. Here he is going out to do his observations. This is not an unpleasant job, right? I mean, it's a beautiful place to do this work. And there's the clipboard. I think one of the things that was so appealing to me about this was its old school quality. You know, it wasn't GPS, it wasn't GIS, it wasn't some computer something or another. It's a guy with a clipboard and a pencil. I can relate to that. I like that. It was so comfortable. It was so real. It was so relatable. And it was something all of us can do. He made very few actual measurements, but sometimes he would bust out a little plastic ruler and measure the actual length of a bud and record that. Again, it's this idea of the correlation between temperature and the progression of the forest through its season. So over time, you can see, oh God, you know, the beech trees hadn't even cracked their buds yet. And look, this year, they're already a couple millimeters into their first new leaves. It's the kind of knowledge that adds up over time. No one thing seems like much in the moment, but over time you can see patterns, and that's the magic of science. You know, the summers as you know, in New England, it's a funny thing. It's spring and all of a sudden you're roasting and the ferns are just like burst out of the ground and everything's happening at once. This picture was taken in May and John is in a high tide of ferns. It was just a glorious time in the woods. I think that period from April through May was just delectable. You know, you have the early spring ephemerals that come only at that time before the canopy is fully on and the ferns are coming out and the birds are going off. It was just luscious. And at a certain point I said to John, you know, I need a tree. I'm writing this book. I need my own tree. You know, I need a tree that will be my witness tree. And the term witness tree, as you know, because you're from New England, is an actual thing, right? These are the ways that the surveyors, when they were first settling the areas, laid out plots. And you can go to, you know, the town records anywhere in New England and see these records. They still exist of the original witness trees selected by the land surveyors. My witness tree is a metaphorical witness tree. It's not as old as those trees. It is not in fact a witness tree. It's a metaphorical witness tree. The idea is the same, that you have a sentinel over time that is a witness to environmental change. And that's why I titled the book what I did. And it's why I decided I needed a witness tree around which to tell this story. So I said, John, I need a tree. So you know what we did? We went around the 25 trees on his loop and we auditioned trees. We had to pick one that would be the right one for the story, right? As much as I loved the little striped maple, which is a beautiful species we don't have out here, but you do. I love the softness of the leaves and their shape, and I love the beautiful tresses of seeds in the fall and the lovely lemon color of the leaves, but it doesn't get very big and it doesn't live very long. So striped maple didn't make the list. I loved the black gum swamp. There's a whole swamp of black gum trees at the Harvard Forest, which in the fall, I mean, the color of red of those trees is something to see. It's beyond red. It's more like scarlet. And the oldest tree in the Harvard Forest is a black gum, actually. It's about 350 years old, but it's kind of an obscure species, right? Who's got a black gum? I don't have one. I never lived with one. So that didn't make it, even though it's beautiful in the fall and it's the oldest tree, no black gum. And then we're coming into another portion of John's walk and he stops at this one tree and he says, I think this could be the one for you. And I look at it and I tip my head back. I think it's really big. You know, it's really, really big. It's extraordinarily beautiful. It's an oak, which was very important to me because oak is the most common species in the Northern Hemisphere of tree. If it were an animal, it would be a dog. Everybody's got an oak. They're just very, very common. And so I thought it's big, it's beautiful, it's the right species, but is it old enough? I knew I needed at least 100 years. So that's where David comes in. David Horwig. I said, David, we've got to core my tree. We've got to figure out how old it is. And so here I am. I've just met this tree. What's the first thing I do? I ask him to core it, which seemed kind of unkind. Coring doesn't hurt a tree. It seems awful, but honestly, a tree coring device is no bigger than this pen. It's smaller than a drinking straw. And so, you know, you core it in there, you pull it out, and you get this wand of time. You get this look into the actual insides of a tree and its years of growth. And there's just nothing like it. There's no other record that's going to tell you what a tree core will tell you. It's actually not very easy to do. You have to press really hard to get it into something like a red oak. The tree really fights you as you're taking it out. It really grips the core. And if you don't get it out in time, you will never get it out. It actually gets hot from the friction of the tree grabbing on. So it's a pretty dramatic process. Then you get this delicate, delicate core out. And the way they save them in the field actually is inside Starbucks drinking straws. They're just the right size. So anytime we went anywhere for coffee, it was like, quick, get the straws. And we just like, you know, grab 10 of them off the counter and run out. There's this ongoing debate, who had the better straws, Starbucks or McDonald's. Basically, we were always palming straws for our work in the woods. So David cores the tree and he takes it back to his office and he puts it under the microscope. You know, he mounts it on this piece of wood and he looks at it and he's counting the rings under the microscope to see just how old it is. And John O'Keefe joined in on this process. His field estimate was 110 years, and he was just about exactly on the nose. It was older than a century. So that was it. We decided that would be my tree. And so then it's the pleasure of observing it over 4 seasons through the spring when I took this just godly photograph. Isn't that an amazing photograph of the tree? I mean, it's just me and my stupid iPhone. I mean, I can't believe what you can take on. Look at it. It's an iPhone, I don't even know, 5, whatever. It probably belongs in a museum. Still works, still use it. It took this picture in May. Just as beautiful in the summer when you get those full leaves, you know, how the trees are in the first full leaf of summer. They're just delicious, aren't they? They haven't yet taken on their sort of stiffer, waxy cuticles, so they're still very soft, and they've got that fresh green color. Oh, this is probably the first week of June when I took this photo, maybe a little later. Of course, the beauty of autumn, you know, that golden lamplight that we get in the New England woods, and then the incredible adagio pace of the drop of the leaves, and they swirl and they blow, and I mean, there's just nothing like it, is there? It's just spectacular. And then being under an oak tree, the rat-a-tat-tat during a mast year of the acorns is super fun, and all these animals that are coming, you know, the chipmunks and the blue jays and the turkeys. It's a fiesta in the forest. I got to experience all of that. I loved it. And then, of course, winter, you know, you get this noble stoicism of the forest in the winter. It's 7 degrees, it's 10 degrees, it's super cold. And these ephemeral moments that you get to see when you really live with a tree. I'm so close, I can see the top from the little house that I'm living in. So I'd go over there several times a day. And in a morning that's very cold, before I took this picture, probably before 10:30 in the morning, the whole tree was rimed with white frost. Every twig, do you see the twigs and how each one is shining with the light coming through that little bit of frost? That effect was gone by 10:30. It was over. It was just a moment. And it is those moments that are so beautiful. I want to recommend to you, probably a lot of you are Thoreau fans. You probably all read Walden, and we all love Thoreau. I'll tell you something. The thing that I really loved actually best was his journals, not his finished, polished work, but his actual journals. And there are volumes and volumes and volumes of them. Before I went out to the Harvard Forest, I went to Widener Library and I filled up bean bags of Thoreau's journals. And I took them out there with me. And I made a habit of checking his journal on the same date of, you know, when he was out there that I was out there. What did he say on December 12th? Or what did he say on January 15th? And this one day he described a snowfall that was very, very dry. And the snowflakes, as he said, were just perfectly rendered. You could see them quite exactly. And he said, it's snowing geometry. And I had said the exact thing to myself that same day because I was wearing my black Filson wool coat and a flake hit my sleeve and it was sitting there like something you'd see in a jeweler's box, you know, on the black, this white flake perfectly rendered in absolute geometric perfection. And then I read Thoreau saying it's snowing geometry, same day. Everything changes and nothing changes, right? There's some real beauty in that. The poetics of trees have spoken to us across the generations, across the years. These are precious places, precious places. They're touchstones for our spirit and for our soul. And these gifts we give to ourselves of observing them are not trivial. This is worthy of your investment of imagination and intellect. Every tree deserves your time. Spring. I mean, I think the thing that I also took away from this time at the Harvard Forest was recognizing the joy in seeing the little things, not just the glorious tree, but the coming of the spring ephemerals, this lady slipper orchid. I mean, how do you walk past that? I just thought it was the most beautiful thing. I got down on my hands and knees every day while this was going on, this outbreak of orchids. You know, you can pinch them and they open and they smell, I mean, they're just ravishingly beautiful. And the spring ephemerals, they only happen during a very short window of seasonal time before the canopy leaves out. The sun is hitting the forest floor and you get these beautiful flowers. You know, not only that, but this only happens in a healthy wood. If you have an overpopulation of deer, You don't get the spring ephemerals because they all get completely hammered and overgrazed by the deer. This is a sign of a forest in good balance. Of course, the colors. I want you to understand that this is one branch. Isn't that crazy? It's one little branch on a tiny little white oak that I walked by on our phenology trail. It wasn't any higher than my hip. One branch. Look at those colors. Ridiculous. And to take the time to notice the mushrooms when they came up in the spring. You know, again, this business of taking time and observing. I kept several different kinds of notes while I was at the forest. One was my field notes with John while we were doing the phenology walks. What was he observing? You know, recording that. And then I also kept a journal that was just from myself of my experience of being at the forest. And then there was a whole other kind of note taking, which was from my source materials, my books and lectures and so forth. So I had really 3 different kinds of recording that were going on at all times. And you know, I think a journal of the seasons and what's going on is just a beautiful way to be in the world. And I would really recommend it to you. And take a million pictures. You know, these iPhones are great. You can take as many as you want. You can record the sound of the frogs. It's wonderful. I have a thing about frogs. They keep coming up, don't they? You know, they're very delicate. They have these tiny little toes and that beautiful skin. And I was at the Harvard Forest long enough to hear and find the spring peepers, but then also watch them grow up into adults. I had a passion for bird tracks and animal tracks in the snow. These stories written in a secret language of snow were very important to me. I would go out first thing in the morning after a big snow and look and see who'd been by and what had happened. And this bird track, you don't know the whole story. What happened next? Where was it coming from? Where did it go off to? The delicacy of it, that you can see the heavier track where it first landed, the lighter track as it's getting ready to take off. Give yourself the gift of the time to really see all these details and learn your tracks. You know the track of a chipmunk, from a squirrel, from a bird. You know, learn your tracks. It's a joyful thing. Take the time to notice even something as seemingly mundane, but really quite ravishing as these leaves underneath the surface of a puddle. They're shining through the water, and the tree from which they fell is reflected above. That's all that's going on here. It's just another everyday miracle in the New England woods. I love the red Fs. You know, these little salamanders that you get after the rain, they come marching out. They're so incredibly brave because they're really quite toxic. Nothing messes with them. This color in nature is like, don't go there. We have them too. It's a different species. Ours is called the Pacific giant rough-skinned newt. It's much bigger than this. Same idea. It's bright orange. Nothing eats it. These little guys, you know, at the Harvard Forest after a rain, they were everywhere, and I was crazy about them. I did my best to get good pictures. Those little spots are actually quite fluorescent, bright green. I mean, they're just beautiful, and I love their bold Jurassic bearing, you know, the way they're just this tiny little body, and they're going over sticks and stumps and unstoppable. Love it. Something as simple as a raindrop rolling down my tree, and how that raindrop turns into a lens so that, you know, that lichen is expanded. So, you know, in addition to making notes and taking pictures, I also, oh, here's that frog that I got to watch grow up. I thought that was really super great. I also learned my plants. And if you don't know your native plants, that's just a must do, isn't it? And for me, I had to sort of throw out all my Pacific Northwest plants because that's where I work out here in the Northwest. And at first I felt sort of unfaithful. You know, it was just plain strange bringing in all these new plants. It's like, is that allowed? Should I do that? But you have to know your plants. It's a very intimate way to know the landscape, and don't leave out the ferns. I mean, I think the Pacific Northwest and the Northeast, we have this fern thing going that is very special. I mean, the ferns that we get to enjoy through their seasonal changes are spectacular. And this moment when the croziers first press through, it's going to happen in about a month. And they move the leaves out of the way, and they begin this circinate vernation where they very slowly, gradually open it. I mean, I don't know. If that doesn't move you, I don't know what does. That's just a beautiful ballet that's going on right underfoot. I also started pressing plants. I thought that I wanted to create something lasting. And so I got a plant press and I began to create a collection of pressed plants from the forest. And I'm really glad I did that. I still have them with me now, 5 years later. And that was very special to me. I think when I think about other ways in which I want to learn and grow as an observer of nature, something that I would like to bring into my life is botanical illustration. I'd like to learn how to do that. And I have learned more about pressing plants and preserving them since I was at the Harvard Forest. Most anywhere you live, there's going to be a resource for you to learn these skills, whether it's a nature center or an herbarium. Seek these places out and learn these skills and pass them on to your young friends. You know, these are things that people used to do in the past and they kind of got too busy or they forgot or they didn't bother or something. But, you know, you should have your rock collection and you should be out there creating your pressed plants, and you should know your native plants and your birds. These were things that 100 years ago everybody knew, and we all kind of lost that intimacy with nature, but it can all be regained, and there's great joy in this. There's great joy, and there's also a lot to learn. You know, the things that John and I explored basically boiled down to a couple key scientific conclusions that Andrew's lab published in a series of papers. And what it all came down to was the following. You know, basically, the seasons were on a faster track. Spring was coming earlier. Fall was coming later. So you had these super-sized growing seasons. They were much longer than they used to be. It used to be that fall was coming, you know, certainly by you know, mid-October, later October. But now the first frost was coming even almost like Thanksgiving. It was just so much later. And so winter's getting squeezed on both ends. And that has profound effects on forest physiology. And Andrew's lab published some papers that dove into that. So what happens when you have these longer growing seasons? What does that do? How does the forest respond? What does that mean? Why is it happening? And what they determined is several things. Number one, it's happening because it's warmer. It's just warmer than it used to be. And not only that, but there's more CO2 absolutely in the atmosphere. Trees use CO2 to make sugar. That's how they make their food, through the process of photosynthesis. And so you think to yourself, more CO2, it's probably a good thing, right? More food. And indeed, the Harvard Forest has the longest record anywhere of carbon sequestration by atmospheric deposition anywhere. So they can tell you how fast are the trees growing, and red oak is the species that they studied because it's the dominant species of the forest. And what they've learned at the Harvard Forest is over the past 25 years, trees like my tree are just bench pressing carbon. They're growing faster than they used to. They're getting bigger. And it's happening for three reasons. One is it's warmer, the growing season is longer, and there's more CO2 in the atmosphere. And so these trees are growing. And you think, well, that sounds great. Well, depends, right? I mean, they can keep growing as long as it's not too dry. If they don't have water, they're not going to grow because plants need water. And so, you know, right now, a tree like my tree is in Fat City. It's doing very, very well. It's growing faster. And we know from the records at the Harvard Forest, that's true not just of my tree, but red oak generally, and not only in the Harvard Forest, but across New England. And so the Richardson lab determined from observation and actual physiological records that this thing that we all kind of feel like we know, spring's earlier, fall's later, seems warmer, it's true. Those things are true, and they are affecting the trees here now today. This isn't something in the far future. It's happening now. So they learned that. You know, the other thing that they determined is that, you know, this effect is, it's creating a kind of a new super season, you know, that's ahead of the preset physiology that's baked into the genetics of these trees, you know, because you ask yourself, well, gosh, if the first frost isn't even coming till like Thanksgiving, but most of the leaves are already off the trees before then. Well, why is that? It seems like they could go much longer. It's still warm. Why don't they just keep going? And they poked at that question. They asked that question. And what they figured out was that what we're beginning to see is a bit of a mismatch between the actual lived seasons of the trees that they're experiencing versus what's in their seasonal timing that's baked into the DNA of the tree. And there's a mismatch there. Well, to me, that was kind of creepy. This idea that there are really now two seasons, the actual seasons on the calendar and the seasons made by us. In some instances, maybe it's not that important. Does it really matter if the trees fall off, if the leaves fall off the trees just a couple weeks, earlier, later, whatever? Does it really matter? Well, it does matter. It matters a lot, actually, if you start to look at the relationships between things, which is what ecology is all about. It's about the relationships between different living things. So let's just say for a moment, you're a bird that eats a certain inchworm. And that's what you eat, and it's what you feed your hatchlings. Well, if that inchworm has already emerged and eaten and senesced by the time you show up on the same date that you always showed up, because the forest, the timing of the bud break is ahead and it's warm, so the insects are hatching out sooner, that means suddenly there's a mismatch between that bird and that food source for its young. And so this is called synchrony. And this idea of synchrony is incredibly important in nature. And one of the signal discoveries for me in studying the forest in witness tree was that this synchrony is what makes it all work. It's like an orchestra playing a piece of music. This thing happens, and then that thing happens. And it can only happen because that has already happened, or these things have to happen at exactly the same time. Bird, hatchling, food source, or for that matter, bee, flower, pollination. And this beautiful synchrony has been built over an incredibly long span of evolution of time, of evolution. And so a tree, a long-lived species, doesn't just bust through generations like a fruit fly. A tree like my tree is not in a position to quickly turn on a dime with this new-made climate that we created in just the last 150 years of the Industrial Revolution. So it's doing fine right now. But what will the future look like as this process continues to accelerate? Because it isn't just that things have changed, it's that they've changed so quickly. I mean, basically you have this change in the amount of carbon in the atmosphere that's at a geologic scale that's happened over this tiny historic time frame. So, those were the key findings of the Richardson Lab. Taught to us all by the forest, and the book Witness Tree, tells that story of walking the woods through those 4 seasons, and also of getting to know one tree really well and what it taught me and can teach us about climate change. I want to share just a few more pictures with you of my year with the tree. I learned to climb it. I mean, at a certain point, I felt like if you're going to really know a tree, you have to kind of climb it, don't you? You can't just like sit there on the ground and look up at it. I wanted to really get to know it, so I hired a wonderful friend, Melissa, and her sister, Melissa and Beryl Levangie. They were the tree wardens for Petersham. Now, you're from New England, so you know what a tree warden is. We don't have those out here. I think we should have them. And in Massachusetts, they've got a tree warden in every town, and their job is to take care of the trees in the public spaces. And, sometimes that person is not so enthusiastic about the job. Maybe they're also the public works director, whatever. But sometimes you get somebody like Melissa and Bear, who are truly the champions for the trees in the town. And they're also championship climbers. And so I hired them to teach me how to climb. And so here we are. You can see I look a little skeptical. I'm in my harness for the first time, but I'm thinking, what the hell? I've got health insurance. Let's do this. And up we go. And it was fantastic. It really transformed my sense of the tree. To feel it bear my weight, to feel it move in the wind. To be able to stand on a branch and look around and observe the canopy and make notes and really feel what it was like up there, and to look out into the canopy completely changed my sense of the tree. And here was the best day of all. So you know, I learned to climb in winter, but we progressed. We kept climbing through the seasonal year, and this is the last climb we did together. And Melissa and Bear surprised me by putting a hammock up in the tree as a present, as a surprise. And I made a picnic that day, and I mean, it was a real picnic. I roasted a chicken, I packed chocolate, and I even took my laptop up there with the idea of writing, you know, a little bit of the book up there. I thought, why not? You know, I'm in the tree. Let's write about the tree. So I want to read you what I'm typing in that picture. How captivating to see a tree from within. The light was ever changing, the sun a luminous pageant of green and gold as the big oak's branches parted in the wind, letting the sun spill in, then swung back, offering light shade. Not the deep shade of the forest floor, but lacy, ever changing. With each toss of the wind, everywhere there was movement. A black and yellow swallowtail butterfly cruised through the treetop just past my shoulder. The chickadees were calling sweetly, alert to our presence. The leaves stirred in every direction as the wind blew, and the tree moved with it up and down, sideways, all at once. The hammock rode the tree in the wind, its rocking embrace amniotic and primal. I felt both at home and distinctly a visitor. I thought, what familiar and alien things trees are all at once. I thought, they remain wild, essentially other, a kingdom apart. We need them, but they do not need us. Yet, watching the oak from up here for the first time, I felt I understood clues for our own persistence. I'd noticed the oak's genius in abiding with other species above and below ground in a diverse, interconnected nation of lives. From the deer and the bear and the squirrel and the blue jay to the vast, spreading, nourishing mycorrhizal networks amid its roots, it seemed, I thought, rocking in the oak's embrace, that our task now is to live on this earth at least as successfully as this tree. It felt like a lesson, a personal reckoning, an ethical awakening from a human-centered or anthropocentric view to simply grasp the reality of where we truly stand on this earth. We're not separate from nature. We are of it and in it, and we need nature. And now we need an ethical framework to match. We need a tree culture, a nourishing mutualism that embeds us in creation, working with one another in collaboration with nature to sustain us in our common home. And with that, I'll say thank you. And, you know, I'd love to hear your questions, your thoughts, your comments.
Thank you, Linda. Can you
Yeah,
hear me?
I hear you
Really?
fine.
Okay. Can others hear me? I can't tell. Nod if you can. That was great.
Good.
Okay, so if people have questions, why don't you just simply unmute yourself and see if that works for
What's the name of the book?
the name of the book is Witness Tree. Now Linda's muted. Okay. Hold on a second. We're doing some technical adjustments here.
I think you can hear me now, right?
Yes, I
Good.
can.
Good. Great.
So if you'd like to ask questions, just unmute yourself.
Or you can write it in the chat and I can ask the question.
Right.
I have a quick question. It's Addie here of Lynda. Can you hear me?
I hear you
Yes.
perfectly, Addie. Go ahead.
So earlier in the hour, you mentioned someone who was taking walking and measuring and taking notes about the trees.
Mhm.
And then maybe 15 minutes later, you mentioned another person who was doing a similar task. How did they mark their trees to know which specific tree they were recording on each separate year?
Right. So they're tagged. Each tree has a numeric tag. And so John O'Keefe is the person who had the trees that he followed for 25 years, the same 50 trees. And Andrew Richardson is the person who had the phenocams, those cameras up on the tops of the towers. And so what John's record was creating was a kind of ground truth for the bigger picture that Andrew was recording in the cameras. So John was the person who's going tree to tree, these same 50 trees, each one has a tag, each one has a number, and it's not changed over time. And so anyone could look back over his data sheets for the last 25 years and see what that beach had been doing on March 12th and so on. And into the future, he's still collecting data. We're friends, like we talk all the time, and I visited him. I visited the Harvard Forest lots of times since I left. I would have gone last year, but of course we can't fly right now, and Harvard Forest is not happening right now. But you know, that kind of long-term data is just so valuable because it sits there forever. And the longer he keeps that data, the more valuable it becomes, because each new year gives you another perspective. So over time.
I should have preceded my question by telling you how thrilled I have been to listen to you, and how I actually realized that I've been a phrenologist for 25 years at our little house, the Connecticut house, not the Rhode Island house. But I write my notes, I study my everything. I've loved
Good.
it. And it's been fun to meet
Good.
you virtually.
Oh, how fun.
Thank you for your
Great.
talk.
You're very welcome. That's great that you've been doing that. Have you noticed any changes over time?
Oh, hundreds.
There you go. I'd
Hundreds.
like to hear a few. What sorts of things?
Well, a decade ago is when I started noticing the big rains coming up from the west. Just
Oh,
suddenly we had tropical rain,
yeah.
creating great erosion, and because we're on a hill.
Uh-huh.
And it was really startling, and everybody thought I was crazy, of course. But I felt that was distinctly different. Also, I also noticed a lot of similarities, but I noticed when first bulbs break the ground, and what the weeks are, and
Sure.
but that's tricky because if there's snow cover, you aren't sure.
Yeah.
But I know the snowstorms. I have it all written down, and when birds come and when they go, and how many nests they have, and how many per nest, and
That's great.
it's
Good for
it's
you.
wonderful.
It is wonderful, isn't it? Isn't it a wonderful way to be in the world?
I think so.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever read any of the old records that are out there that were kept by some of these families in England? Have you ever looked at any of that stuff?
I have not, but I should go to our town library. We have two libraries, the old one and a new one, and I think I'll go to the old one after COVID opens it up.
The other thing that's really beautiful to read is a paper that Aldo Leopold wrote about phenology and his observations at the farm. It's really lovely. It's, I mean, I just love his writing anyway. Sand County Almanac, of course, is the classic, but you know, his scientific writing is quite beautiful, and it's very unusual to read a scientific paper that's written with the lyricism and poetry that he brought to it. I just love
Right.
this.
Thank you.
Yeah. What else? Who else has got?
There's a question that's come in, Lynda, through chat.
Mhm.
What has happened to all the data that the Harvard Forest has collected? Does it go into a national database?
It's available online. It's, you know, it's quite spectacular. All their stuff is available online. You can look it up. And in fact, John's data that I spoke of, that 25-year record, now longer, it's been used by so many scientists all over the country and all over the world. And that's one of the beauties of what they do there. They require anyone doing research at the Harvard Forest to share their data. It's meant to continually build a body of knowledge for the world. It's quite special, and I really respect that. And there's also a fantastic library of photos that scientists have also logged over the years, and this stuff is available online. If you go to the Harvard Forest website, there's a lot there to mine, including, by the way, there's a whole homepage about the witness tree and my project at the forest, and you'll see a video there. You'll see that it's now a tweeting tree. That's the world's biggest thing on Twitter, literally. It's got a lot of followers. You guys can follow it. You can see the Harvard Forest webcam on my tree. You check in on the tree and see what it's up to today. I look at it all the time because I miss it. So at the Harvard Forest, you can also see the portal for all their data. And that includes John's phenology information. If you query, in their search bar, if you just put in the word phenology, you'll find a lot of stuff.
Lynda, hi.
Hi.
Do you know, you certainly probably do, but was the Harvard Forest at one time logged? And what is its more like, colonial history or post-colonial history?
Yeah, I love this. I spent a lot of time on that because I think landscape history is one of the first things that anyone needs to know about a place if they want to know it at all. And the story of the Harvard Forest is like, well, really most of New England, right? It was absolutely farmed. It was, everything was cut to the ground and it was farmed. But then, in about 1860, that's the height of deforestation in New England and also at the Harvard Forest. Things started to really change for people living in New England because of the opening of the Erie Canal, which suddenly created a market, a way for goods to come from the Midwest with those much better soils and bigger farms to get their produce to market here on the East Coast, the much more populous East Coast. And so New England farmers, they walked away from the farms, really. They went and started working in the mills, and most of those farms did exactly what happened at the Harvard Forest, which is they regrew to trees. And there was a second harvest of white pine taken mostly for boxes for that produce being shipped on railroads. But the hardwoods, the sprouters, they all just came up. And the woods you see today at the Harvard Forest are from that era. These are not old forests. Some of them are older. The hemlock wood has some of the older trees in the Harvard Forest, but even those are not venerable like we regard out here in the Pacific Northwest with 1,000-year-old species. But most of the Harvard Forest, this is young stuff. These are younger trees. They're regrowth, and I bring this up to make a point, which is every tree matters. It isn't just the big, magnificent old growth stands out here in the Pacific Northwest, or for that matter, in the rainforest. These vigorous, young, resprouted, sort of weedy forests, they're incredibly important. They're packing away carbon like crazy. I mean, the 7-state area of New England is now one of the most forested areas in the entire country. And these woods have completely rewilded. In the time of Thoreau, he would write, "Thank God they can't cut down the clouds," right? He was writing actually at the height of deforestation in New England, and his heart was broken that the animals that his grandfather saw or his father would have seen in the woods were all gone. The biggest thing around was a muskrat. You didn't see a deer. There's nothing for a deer to eat. And so fast forward to today, and all of the so-called nobler animals that he wrote about are back. People in New England today are living more closely, in greater proximity to more wildlife than probably ever in recorded history, because they've all come back. The bears, the deer, the bobcat. You hear all these stories about bears under the porch, don't put out your bird feeder. Well, that didn't used to be a problem. And it's because the woods are back. You bring back the woods and the trees, and you bring back the wildlife and the birds. The whole suite of bird life is changing. There's a raging debate in a place like Petersham over, well, do you really want that? We love the bobolink. This is a bird and a sound of our agricultural heritage, the sound and song of a bobolink, which you'll only get in an open field. Well, that's not the natural state of that place. If you were to let it come back into what it would be trees, and then you no longer have bobolinks. So, nothing in nature ever stays still, does it? Change is is the norm, and the degree of change that those New England forests have seen over time since white settlement, you cannot overstate it. It's a remarkable story of change and change and change again. This is a beautiful book that John O'Keefe did. You can buy it on the website of the Harvard Forest. It's just a beautiful book, and it's based on the dioramas that are at the Fisher Museum at the Harvard Forest. Again, this is another reason why I really hope you'll visit when you can. There's a beautiful set of dioramas that show this whole story of landscape change in New England and at the Harvard Forest. And there are also some really wonderful, informative displays about what that's meant for forest ecology and for wildlife. And even, by the way, stream levels. I mean, when you have forests, the streams are much smaller because the trees are taking up all that groundwater. You know, you read about these mills that were operating on these streams, and you go and you look at that stream, and it's this stinky little thing. You think, well, how'd they run a mill? Well, there didn't used to be any trees, and the stream ran much harder. And so you cannot overstate the degree of landscape change in New England, and it's profoundly interesting to learn about and study and unpack the many ways that has affected the entire ecology of the area of New England. And to me, honestly, it's a deeply hopeful story, because you go from a place that was so denuded of its forests to a place today that is thickly forested and replete with wildlife, and in such a short time. That's a 150-year story. And so it is very exciting to me to see the incredible resilience of nature, and to learn that if we back off and we let nature do what nature alone can do, it will happen. You know, you can count on it. Out here in the Pacific Northwest, we tend to talk about things like dam removal. You know, you take out a dam and the salmon come back. You can count on it. You can bring back the salmon, you have more bears, you have more songbirds, you have more of all of the 123 species that live off of salmon and salmon eggs and fingerlings. And it's the same in New England. You bring back the trees, you get everything else.
Nice.
It's not a one-way. It's not a one-way journey, of course. I mean, you're losing things too because of all these invasive insects that are coming in with climate change. You know, the Asian ash borer, the hemlock woolly adelgid. You know, the loss of the ash trees, the terrible loss of the hemlock. So it's not all going forward to regeneration. We're losing things too. And of course, what is the most profound and lasting change is development. I mean, if you care about natural systems, it's all about land conservation and keeping land in active farming and active forestry, and not letting it convert to pavement and density. You know, we have to all get the hang of you know, living where the people are rather than continuing to push out to where they're not.
So there's a longest question here for you, Lynda.
I'll do my best.
From somebody in Cave Creek, Arizona.
Oh, wow.
Mostly cactus, however. She says, I teach the edible and medicinal uses of plants. Our honey and velvet mesquites, as well as our ironwoods, are my favorite. I'd love to have my tree. Where would I be able to get an age? What steps would I go through as a beginner? Step-by-step phenology and be able to make a difference. My father started plotting phenology on the same piece of land as I live on now. My kids will follow. So she's asking for some direction about how to find a tree for herself.
Well, that's beautiful. So did I hear you right that you're actually in the desert? We're talking cactus? Did I hear you?
Yes.
Oh, but you've got some mesquite. Did I hear that too?
Yes.
Well,
Mesquite and ironwoods.
Okay, ironwood. Wow, that lasts a long time. That's a good choice right there. So, you know, you want a species that's long-lived, right? That's why I couldn't go with the striped maple, much as I love it. You need a venerable species that has some time on it already, and also that has some time ahead of it, so that it can hopefully be an intergenerational witness for you. So that to me says ironwood, big time. That's a long-lived species. It should be a species that you love. It should be a species that you want to spend time with and enjoy and observe. And it should be in a place that's not hard to get to. This is key. You know, if you want to keep company with the tree, if you have to get in a car and go there every time you want to see it, that's an issue. If you can just go out there like I did in your slippers and in your snowshoes and in your bare feet and in your sneakers or on your lunch hour or right before you make dinner, that's the one you want. You want the one that can be part of your life so you can be part of its life. It's much harder if it's farther away. So job one, pick a tree that's going to live a while. Job two, make it something you can easily get to, preferably just on foot. Pop out the door, walk no more than a quarter mile, boom, you're there. And make it a tree that entrances you. It should be a species you enjoy, that you find beautiful. And then, you mentioned your father had been keeping records. I mean, gosh, maybe you can inherit one. If he had a tree or even just a particular corner of the property that he had invested a lot of observation in, maybe you want to try to hone in on that spot so that you can, keep a beautiful thing going into another generation. But those are the key things: proximity, longevity, and interest. It should be a species that you're really interested in. Those would be my pointers for how you make your choice.
Great. Thank you, Lynda. Another question about what you are writing about now.
Well, thank you for that question. I have a book coming out in June about a completely different subject. It's about orca whales and salmon. It's called Orca, Shared Home, Shared Water. This came out of a crisis out here in the Pacific Northwest of a mother whale who lost her calf a half an hour after birth, and she refused to part with it. She carried it under her peck or by her teeth for more than 1,000 miles in 17 days. She wouldn't let it go. And I wrote about her. And by the time I finished writing about her in the paper, 6 million people were reading that story online because it was unbearable, right? I mean, it was unbearable. The idea that she was so grief-stricken over that baby, she wouldn't let it go. Well, that led to a whole team of us at the Seattle Times thinking, well, why don't we take a closer look at these southern resident orcas that are unique to our region and critically endangered? Why? What's going on with them? So we launched a big project and we wrote a 5-part series that went on for 18 months. And from that, I wrote a book, and it will be out in June. And it was a profound experience to live with that family of orca whales over all that time and really study all the different forces that they're up against, why they're so fragile and at risk of extinction at this point. What is extinction? What does it mean? So that'll be out in June. And I've already started my next project, which is about old growth trees. It's about big trees. And I'm teaming up with Jerry Franklin, who's out here at the University of Washington. He's 84 years old, so he's a little bit of an old growth tree himself. He's the father of old growth science. He's the person who figured out a lot of what we know out here in the West, Northwest about old growth trees. And we're going to team up on a book that I'm calling The Venerables. I don't know if that title will stick, but the thing that Jerry has taught me is that old trees aren't just bigger versions of young trees. They're different. They have special ecological properties and things that only they can do in terms of biodiversity and carbon sequestration and so forth. So that book is all of about a week old in my mind. Maybe 6 months. It started with a very special hike in a grove of old growth trees in Southwest Washington that he recommended. And it's just a subject that comes right out of Witness Tree. When I was working on Witness Tree, I certainly didn't finish with forests. I really have a special love for forest ecosystems. It has to do with how I grew up, I think. And so I can't wait to do this book. It's really fun. I have to force myself to put it away every night after dinner and go to bed. It's so much fun. I mean, the learning of it, the science of it, the beauty of it, the poetics of big trees, it's really, 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 really fun.
So on that note, Lynda, we are drawing to the end of our time that we said we would hold this.
Okay.
But I can't thank you enough for just giving us such a compassionate story about what it means to be in the woods and your own personal experience. And as I said to you when we were previewing, as Seamus Haney says, what you notice becomes your life. And certainly your work exemplifies that. in the Harvard forest. So thank you so much. Thank you to all of us for joining this very special presentation, and we look forward to seeing you in the ones that are about to come. Take care, Lynda. We'll be talking in the future.
Thanks,
Thank
Abigail.
you.
A lot of fun. Be well, everybody. Hope to see you in the woods sometime.